This is Upwell, a new podcast from Only.one, featuring entrepreneurs, advocates, and leaders working to protect and restore the ocean and the planet. And I'm your host, Aaron Kinnery. Today, we have Sam Bencheghib, co-founder of Make a Change World and Sungai Watch, who ran across America to bring attention to the global plastic crisis, and now is helping to combat plastic waste in Bali, where he grew up. Let's dive in. Sam, thanks for joining the podcast. As you know, I've followed your work for a long time, and I'm excited that you and Sungai Watch are impact partners for Only.one, which I know we'll discuss a bit today. But first, I wanted to start back in 2017 when you and your brother Gary kayaked down the world's most polluted river and filmed it. What inspired that journey?
Hey, Aaron, thank you for having me. So that was the sort of what kickstarted everything for us. In 2017, my brother Gary and I, we had grown up in Indonesia, and we had seen plastic pollution, in our faces for years and years. And that was really the first thing we did to try to fix this problem. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to highlight what the world's most polluted river really looked like. And we decided to just, we knew that Indonesia had a lot of polluted rivers, but we didn't know that the most polluted river was where we grew up in our home country. So when we found out that this river, the Citarum River, was in Java, we decided to come up with a creative way of raising awareness, which was to build 2 kayaks out of the same materials that pollute it. So kayaks built out of plastic bottles, inspired by Mike Horn, an explorer who had done a similar project, but not down a very polluted river. But we built these 2 kayaks, brought our cameras with us, and wanted to showcase the state of this waterway, and also focus on, how does this impact the local communities? Because the Citarum River, the water that is in this river, impacts over 20 million people. People, they bathe in it, they wash their clothes in it. Sometimes they even take this water and boil it. It's the most sad and terrifying visual that you can imagine. There's burning dump sites on both sides of the river. Every 200 meters, there's so much trash that sometimes we get stuck in a plastic berg, is what I like to call it, because there was just mountains and mountains of trash on this river. But what was amazing is that we went down the river, documented it for 2 weeks, released our videos on social media, and those videos got a lot of views, they got a lot of attention, and they eventually got seen by the Indonesian president, who in turn decided to create a master plan for how to clean this river. And within 4 months of our expedition, we met the president, and he announced that he was hiring 7,000 soldiers to clean this river over the next 7 years. So that was, I guess, our journey and how it started when it comes to plastic pollution. But I think what that showed us was that we can do so much with a creative idea, and by using and utilizing social media as a tool for change.
And that commitment from the Indonesian president came in, I think, the end of 2017. And that was a 7-year commitment, as you mentioned, 7,000 troops deployed to clean the river. How is the commitment progressing?
It's been going really well. We are now sort of creeping up on the 5th year of that cleanup. And obviously there is a big, stop and gap because of COVID. But after 3 years, we were seeing drastic changes with the color of the water. Fish had come back to the water. We would see birds along the river, but also mainly just no plastic. The river is quite long, so it started upstream, going downstream, and it's been incredible to see, the tons and tons of plastic that they've been able to pull from this river. And it's not just cleaning it up, but it's also working with local communities, setting up proper waste management infrastructure along the riverbank. Now you have a lot of communities that have adopted no plastic policies. And so it's really, really good to see how Indonesia has stepped up. I think one of the most inspiring things is that the Indonesian army has said that they're going to war with plastic, not with another country, but with the material. And so that's been really inspiring to see.
That's incredible. I first heard of your work after you finished a run across the United States in early 2020, where over 6 months you ran about 3,000 miles from New York to Los Angeles. How did you come up with this idea?
So after the Chitarum, we had done a few other expeditions with this notion that no idea is crazy enough and that crazy ideas can create change. And when I was at university here in the US, I had just graduated and I was thinking to myself, what is the craziest thing that I can do in the United States to raise awareness about plastic pollution? And being a student in Pennsylvania, most of my classmates and friends were using single-use plastics and disposing of it, and then they had no idea what would happen to the trash. And so I wanted to run from the one ocean to the other, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, to bring the ocean to landlocked communities and speak about plastic pollution to as many people as possible. So not raising money, but just raising awareness. And I thought that by running, from one ocean to the next, and along the way speaking to as many people as possible, I could inspire people to live more sustainably. And so I ran 3,055 miles or 5,000 kilometers. That pretty much equates to one marathon a day, 6 days a week for 6 months. Yesterday was the New York City Marathon. But there was a lot of marathons. There was a lot of running, but I think it was definitely a really amazing journey where I learned a lot about the plastic industry within the US, and also spoke to a lot of people, spoke to a few governors. Predominantly my main target audience were school students, but it was a 6-month journey.
And what was the typical day like? How far were you running every day? What else were you doing throughout the journey?
Sure. So I would wake up quite early, and starting at 5 a.m. I'd start running. And because you're running so much over a really long period of time, you're not running fast. You're not necessarily going for time, but you have deadlines that you need to meet. And so my deadline was 25 miles a day. So I would do 5 segments of 5 miles 5 times a day. So it would take me roughly an hour to run 5 miles. I would run 5 miles. I had an RV follow me, so it was a supported run. There's actually a couple of people out there who have done this run across the US by themselves, pushing a stroller. I decided to do it, with some company, because there's so much behind it, as well as the speeches and the meetings. So it took quite a lot of coordination. But run 5 miles, take a break, for 30 minutes to an hour, eat some food, run another 5 miles. Maybe during the day, halfway points, I would speak to a school or meet with a local mayor, and then go back on the road, run 5 miles. So that means that most of the time when I was speaking to people or speaking to schools, I wouldn't shower. I would just go straight from the road with my running clothes to the classroom or to the boardroom, and then just have conversations with people. And what was really amazing to see was that as I got further west and further into the country, people started reaching out to me. So at the beginning, I had to obviously plan these meetings and plan these school talks, and it took a lot of coordination and logistics. But when I got, to the Midwest, people had started to hear about this run. And so a lot of people were inviting me to speak, and it was hard to choose sometimes, who do I pick when I only have such a short amount of time? And, I had deadlines when I was in Pennsylvania. I had a meeting with the governor of Colorado, on October 10th. And so when on October 10th at noon, you have a meeting, but you're 1,800 miles away, you can't really take shortcuts or take breaks. So it was very full on. It was an intense 6 months, but it was the best feeling to finish and jump into the Pacific Ocean after those long 6 months.
I bet at the end was pretty rewarding. Were there any particularly tough moments throughout the journey, or even maybe moments that were especially uplifting?
Yeah. I think one of the toughest moment was when I realized that, the majority of the states I was running through actually had this thing called a ban against the ban, where because plastic manufacturers are so prominent in those states, the state has made it illegal for cities or municipalities to ban single-use plastics. So, for example, in the city of New York, there's a ban on the plastic bag. We're now seeing a lot less plastic bags on the streets, which is amazing. But when I was running through the US and having these conversations with state representatives and council men and women, they would say that there's nothing they can do because the state has made it illegal. A couple of cities actually that I ran through had tried passing a ban on styrofoam and on plastic bags, and the state had sued them. So that was definitely something that was quite hard to see. And obviously with the run and social media, I was trying to get the word out, but it's much bigger than that. But then physically, I think there were a lot of moments where I questioned what I was doing and why I was out there. I'm not necessarily a runner. I wasn't a runner before this, so I really went into this blind and sort of wanted to dive into this project with this passion that I have against or to fight against plastic. But I remember running in Kansas and had been running for 15 days, and I hadn't made a single turn or had seen much other than cornfields. And so definitely moments where you're going crazy just because there's nothing around you. There's very little to get you or to distract you from just running.
So switching gears back to Bali, where you grew up and where you're working, what's the state of plastic pollution and waste management today in Indonesia?
Yeah, so Indonesia is the fourth most populated country in the world, but unfortunately there's a clear lack of waste management. So you go out on the streets, you have trucks that go out and pick up your household waste, but that's really only for the people that live on the main roads. Everyone else that lives sort of, behind those first houses or the first row of houses, or they live on the outskirts, no one collects their trash. So what they're forced to do is either burn their trash openly, and that equates to roughly 60% of waste in Indonesia is burnt, or the other solution is to throw it in a river where that trash flows downstream and enters the ocean. So there's the stat is not exactly accurate, and no one really knows, but the amount of plastic that's being recycled in Indonesia is equivalent to the amount of plastic that enters the ocean. So that's roughly 9%. And then, some of it is managed property. It goes to landfill. But even the most managed landfills in Indonesia, if you were to see them today, you would not think that that's a managed landfill. You would think that that's just a huge dump, open air. As soon as it rains, where does that trash go? It tumbles down the landfill, and oftentimes those legal landfills are located right next to rivers. Actually, 2 weeks ago, there was right now is monsoon season, so it rains every night. And one of the main landfills, which is in the capital city of Indonesia, Jakarta, flooded. And, a huge percentage of the waste in the landfill just went into the river. And that's unfortunately what we're fighting. And, obviously it's a huge problem because no one knows what to do with their trash. So they're forced to either burn it or throw it in a river. And that's where I think we're really focused on at Sungai Watch is how do we, catch this plastic in the rivers, this huge percentage of waste that's entering our ocean. And then from that, work with local governments to help them to improve their waste management infrastructure.
Great. And let's talk about Sungai Watch a little bit. What's the mission of the organization?
So we're on a mission to stop plastic from going into the ocean and clean our rivers. So we think that by focusing on rivers, we can stop a huge amount and the majority of plastic from entering the ocean. Roughly 80% of plastic in the ocean comes from rivers. And Indonesia is the second biggest polluter to the ocean after China. Some numbers just came out recently where 500,000 tons of plastic are entering the ocean via Indonesia's rivers. That's a huge amount of trash that we can avoid by installing simple technologies in these rivers. And what we're doing is we're focusing on what is the most scalable approach to this problem. And so we're thinking low tech, low cost solutions, which we sort of have, we've piloted and tested, over 10 different designs. And we've now come up with one design that we think is extremely scalable. And what that is a PVC pipe that helps the barrier float, and then a metal grid that is attached to the PVC pipe that sits below the surface of the water, roughly 70 to 80 centimeters, depending on the barrier itself. Sometimes we have longer grids as well that go beneath a meter. It really depends on the river. And install them in the river with the flow of the currents. It catches plastic, and then every day we have to send our team to clean it. They clean the barriers. They bring the trash to one of our facilities, where we then have a team of sorters that sort the trash into 15 different materials. And then once the trash has been sorted, we go the extra step of trying to analyze as much or gathering as much data as possible around the type of trash that we're collecting. So we're scanning every piece of plastic that has a barcode. So that enters our database, and then we're able to track, who are the manufacturers, what are the brands, which helps us engage with really interesting conversations with the plastic manufacturers and the polluters, as well as consumers, stores, and so we now have 173 barriers in Indonesia. We've collected 750,000 kilos of plastics. And we have a team of 104 people that are cleaning these barriers every day. But the idea is, this is all, still quite fresh. We only started Sungai Watch just over 2 years ago. But, we started with one barrier. We saw that it worked. We saw that it was catching plastic. We were taking that trash, sorting it ourselves, and very quickly that became overwhelming. So we started hiring a team. We installed the second barrier, and that model has just been growing and replicating really quickly. So now we're trying to install 1,000 barriers throughout Indonesia's most polluted rivers. And if we can clean Indonesia's 1,000 most polluted rivers, we can stop Indonesia's plastic contribution to the ocean by 40%. So we're really focused right now on how do we clean as many rivers, collect as much plastic from Indonesia's rivers.
And the solution you're deploying with the barriers, it is incredibly and radically simple, which I love. And folks should go onto your website or to your social media to see these barriers, because it's much easier, I think, to understand the concept. But you go so much further, and there's a few things I wanted to loop back to that you mentioned briefly. With only.one and the monthly contributions from our members, we're funding the installation of 5 of these barriers. And I was looking through the impact report your team produced. We've reached about 50% of our goal, collected 25,000 kilograms of plastic over 49 cleanups. And the specificity and the level of detail that you provide, because you scan every piece of plastic, is really interesting. So out of the items that your team collected from the barriers, 28% were plastic bags, 18% were sachets, 9% plastic bottles, 9% hard plastic. Talk a little bit about, again, how your use of data and how you're using technology to really track what you're collecting, and ultimately to influence the producers of plastics, and maybe even to influence policy locally.
Yeah, so I think with any nonprofit work, I think traceability is one of the most important things, and we want to be as transparent as possible. We want to show exactly how much we're collecting, exactly what we're collecting. And for us, that also really helps us, not only just on a sponsor perspective, because they want to know their impact, but more so because that helps us focus on what we need to do to avoid, for example, plastic bags is the number one material we're collecting. So how can we work with the Balinese government and Indonesian government to have them actually enforce the ban that exists against plastic bags? They have a ban against plastic bags, yet plastic bags are the number one material we're finding in rivers. So we're really working with our data to engage in conversations with the government, with plastic manufacturers and the biggest polluters that we're finding, and also with individuals, because we can track now what pieces of plastic we're collecting. So we know what the local Balinese and the local Indonesian are consuming the most of. So we can use that data as well when we speak to schools, when we engage with local communities, and even offer alternatives to those products. But I think the data is really key to how we're really going to be able to solve this issue. I think what we're doing with the barriers, it's great that we're cleaning rivers and installing barriers, because all the trash that we're collecting would have gone to the ocean. The 750,000 kilos we've collected in 2 years, all of that was flushing straight into the ocean if we weren't there. But really, we're going to keep catching and keep collecting plastic, and plastic is always going to flow downstream into our barriers unless we work upstream and use our data to engage in these meaningful conversations to really create the long-term lasting impact that matters.
How do you engage the community in the work?
So the first step is we install the barrier, we get permits from the local government, and because it's so visual, the communities are seeing our teams get in the river, collect the trash every day. And so very quickly, they understand that the trash that our teams are collecting is their trash. And our goal is sort of to place a barrier, and after a few months, maybe more than a few months, but maybe 2 years, that barrier is no longer catching trash. So we're able to remove it and use it to install it somewhere else where that river maybe is more dirty. But I think the first step is just the visual aspect of it and how visual it is. Now when you drive around Bali, you sort of see the Sungai watch barriers in a lot of roadsides. And so I think that helps people understand that our rivers are dirty and that we need to clean them. But then also just through the data, we give a lot of presentations. We work with schools, with local groups as well. But we also, on top of the barriers, a big part of our work is also through cleanups. So we, once a week, every Friday, organize 3 different cleanups around the island of Bali and invite as many people as possible to join us. And I think that's really how we work with large groups. And so every Friday we gather up to 300, 400 people every week. And that's always a good way of raising awareness, of people, getting people involved. I always say, to really understand plastic pollution and its impacts, you need to get your hands dirty and come to one of these cleanups, because a cleanup is never fun. You are picking up someone else's trash, but you understand and you see the consequences of our consumption. And so I think these cleanups are definitely probably the best way to get the community involved.
You mentioned you've scaled to 173 barriers. You've collected 750,000 kilograms of plastic. What are the current challenges you're facing as you think about scaling to try to reach your overall mission of installing 1,000 barriers?
That's a great question. I think that's what we're sort of working on now, is how do we streamline all of our processes. We're sort of operating 3 different companies within one, because we're waste collectors. We're collecting trash from rivers. We're sorters because we're sorting the trash in-house. And then we're also acting as sort of like a recycler, because we're upcycling and recycling the trash ourselves. So there's a lot of processes involved, and the operation can get quite overwhelming and complicated. So I think maybe our biggest bottleneck right now is we want to scale as fast as possible to have as much impact, but how do we operate with bigger teams? How do we manage? We already have over 100 people on the team, which we're really proud of, that we can give them, contracts and health insurance and things that they've never had before. But very quickly, if we scale to 1,000 barriers, that means maybe over 1,000 staff members, and that becomes quite a big operation. And so I think we're looking at how do we create technical partnerships, especially as we scale throughout Indonesia and we're not necessarily able to track everything. So how do we find local partners that can be the operators, and then we'll provide the funding, we'll provide the know-how, we'll provide the technology, and really work on working on collaborations. And I think that's really how we're going to be able to solve plastic from entering the ocean and fighting plastic pollution, is by collaborating with as many local groups, maybe local cleanup groups in the area. And so right now we have a model called our village model, which is how we are planning on scaling. And what that is one facility. We have a network of 20 barriers, and we hire 12 people from the local village. And then that becomes a self-sustaining program where for a year, we're able to promise the removal of 100,000 kilos of plastics from those 20 rivers. And we sort of are envisioning these little villages pretty much everywhere in Indonesia that needs it. And so by creating this really simple model, I think that's how we'll be able to clean as many rivers. But I think, one of the issues is the operation of working with a lot of people.
It's a big challenge. I mean, in Indonesia alone, but globally, the global plastic crisis just seems daunting, and it's really hard to figure out where exactly to begin. So I did want to ask you, what are some things that individuals can do to make a difference in this issue?
Yeah, I think it really all comes down to everybody, and every small action can really make a difference. And I think the first thing people can do is to be conscious of their own plastic consumption. And so, just doing a waste audit of what you're using as an individual. So maybe, looking in your kitchen fridge and seeing maybe what you're purchasing that is packaged in plastic that could potentially be avoided, or looking at your bathroom and doing an audit there. Maybe you're using a shampoo bottle that comes packaged in plastic. There are alternatives out there that are much more sustainable, like a shampoo bar, or doing your grocery shopping at a farmer's market and buying things in bulk as opposed to in small quantities. In Indonesia, one of the main issues we're facing is that everything comes in single-use plastics. So shampoos come in single-use sachets that people just use once and throw away because it's cheaper. And so that's really where the issue lies, is if everyone could, buy in bulk, almost live like we did 50, 60 years ago, the planet would be much better off. But then also, as an individual, you can do much more than that. If you want to go beyond your plastic consumption, you can organize a cleanup in your own neighborhood. They're tough, but they're fun. So you get a community around you, and then support organizations like Sungai Watch or other organizations out there that are cleaning rivers every day, or working on recycling, or working on waste management, and just doing your research and finding how you can support organizations around you that are doing this work.
You've been so creative in your use of content to build awareness, and then also really to think about innovative solutions that you're able to deploy directly. What other organizations or individuals inspire you in your work?
There's, so many, even just within the space of rivers. There's a couple of organizations out there. The Ocean Cleanup is sort of how a company that inspired us with their, technology of cleaning rivers. The Great Bubble Barrier is this technology based out of the Netherlands that, they're acting as a barrier with bubbles that just rise to the surface, and that those bubbles create sort of a natural barrier. And so we've definitely been inspired by looking at the technology aspect of things, because we're working with very simple barriers. It's always very inspiring to see the possibility that come with technology. And I think that's something that we really want to get into, is maybe making our barriers a bit more high tech, while still remaining low cost and scalable, but maybe adding an element that is more tech heavy could be really interesting. So I think those organizations have definitely been ones that we look up to. But then even outside of the plastic space and looking at scalability, we look at organizations like Charity Water and other organizations out there that have been able to find a model that is extremely scalable, where I think if we want to clean rivers, every river is different and no two rivers are the same. So it's very hard to have very high-tech technology barriers, because if it breaks, then it's really hard to fix. But also maybe it works in one river, but it doesn't work in a river in India with really big rainfall. And that typically is the place where there's more trash. So we're really looking at this problem with how do we scale as fast as possible, but how do we stop as much plastic from going into the ocean by being scalable. And so looking at scalable solutions out there in the world is something that we're really intrigued. So if you have any nonprofits that please let me know, and we'd love to read up on them.
Last question. When discussing your 3,000-mile run across the United States, you mentioned how you really thought about it in smaller 5-mile increments, and you focused on these micro goals and then the next big milestone. You've come so far in this work on the global plastics crisis, and you've made an incredible impact. And so I wanted to go back to thinking about, how you first started. Did you think about your work in these sort of small steps, and you still think about these micro goals to stay motivated? And really just general advice that you might have for other aspiring social entrepreneurs who are looking at a big crisis like the plastics challenge or the climate crisis or how to protect marine life. How might they frame their thinking as they sort of approach these challenges?
I think you sort of said it spot on. When I was running across America, I started in New York, I had to run to LA, but I never thought of LA. If I thought of LA, I would break down in tears and be terrified. So I would always think of, let's just get to the next 5 miles. Let's just get to the next state line, and really have these micro goals. And I think we have that at Sungai Watch as well, where, every new barrier is a huge achievement. And, right now we're at 750,000 kilos, which seems huge if you were to ask me 2 years ago when we started Sungai Watch, I never thought we would collect that much plastic. Now we're looking at, our first 1 million kilos, which is creeping up on us. But, every time we reach these milestones, it's also a great time to celebrate with the team, and motivating the entire team, because, they're the reason we got here. And so really making everyone that's involved, making sure that they feel important, because they are. And, the guys that are on our team cleaning rivers every day, chest deep, because sometimes the rivers are deep and they have their waders on, and, it's not easy work, but they go out every day, no matter the circumstances, and pick up this trash. And so really, I think celebration is so important. Making them feel proud, making everybody feel proud, the sponsors, the donors, celebrating with them as well. But, I think plastic pollution might seem like it's beyond saving, but we have to try. And if we don't, then, the planet is not going to be a good place to be living in. So we're really focusing on the small wins and then growing as a company. And I think we're learning along the way so much, and we're failing a bunch. And I think that's also something that's important to note, is that failure is an ingredient of success. And, it's great that we're now at 173 barriers. We've collected 750,000 kilos. But if I were to tell you the amount of times we failed and our barriers broke, or or something happened, or but we learned so much along the way, and that's so relatable to so many aspects of life. But I think that's maybe what I would say to social entrepreneurs out there is just go for it. And if you're passionate about something, then that in itself is amazing. And someone can do really amazing things with passion.
I think that's exactly right. I think the combination of celebrating the small wins, recognizing that failure is part of the journey and it's a learning journey, and understanding and embracing the belief that, none of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. And so it's important to work together.
Yeah.
And I know our team has been thrilled to work with you and your team on this journey. And I know we all look forward to celebrating that 1,000,000 kilogram milestone with you in the future.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sam, for sharing your work with Sungai Watch and how we can all chip in to help address the global plastics crisis. I'll leave links to where you can find Sam and Sungai Watch in the show notes, which you can find at only.one/Upwell. Once again, that's only.one/Upwell. This week's episode was engineered by Jake Bowles, research was supported by Serena Cooper, and our cover art was designed by Joanna Marcus at only.one. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and start your journey to help save the ocean and fix the climate today at only.one. For as little as $9, you can start planting coral and mangroves and removing plastics and carbon. Again, that's www.only.one. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with an all-new episode of Upwell.